My name is Michael Evans. I'm 42 now, but this story really ends 7 years ago, in a sterile hospital room, where I held my dying brother's life in my hands. Before I tell you the exact words I said that made my mother scream and the doctor freeze in shock, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It helps to know I'm not just talking into the void. Okay, so 7 years before that hospital room, my life was perfect. That's the only word for it. A perfect picture postcard from suburban America. I was 35, a senior manager at a sprawling tech firm in St. Charles, Missouri. I had a good job that I was good at, a predictable 8 to 4:30 schedule that allowed for a life outside of work. I was married to Sarah, my wife of 6 years. We lived in a beautiful 2-story colonial with navy blue shutters, the kind of house people slow down to look at in the fall. We had a sprawling backyard with a maple tree that turned a brilliant red every October. Our lives were a comfortable rhythm of weekend trips to the hardware store, barbecues with neighbors, and quiet evenings watching movies. We were even talking about starting a family, had picked out the smaller upstairs bedroom for a nursery. It was the American dream, meticulously assembled, piece by perfect piece. The problem with a perfect picture, I've learned, is that it's fragile. And you get so used to looking at the whole image that you stop noticing the cracks forming in the details. And the details are where the truth always hides. It started subtly. So subtly that for weeks I convinced myself I was just stressed, overthinking, maybe even a little paranoid. Sarah, who worked in interior design and had a later, more fluid schedule, started to glow. That's the only word for it. She'd always been pretty, but this was different. This was a high-wattage shine. Her makeup was suddenly always flawless, even on a Sunday morning. She bought new clothes, not just practical work outfits, but silk blouses and dresses that were more suited for a fancy cocktail bar than a client meeting. Wow, I'd say, watching her get ready. You look amazing. She'd just laugh, a light, airy sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. Just feeling good about myself, honey. A little self-care, you know? Then there were the phone calls. Our house used to be an open book. Now it had secret rooms. She'd be on her phone, laughing and talking in the kitchen. But the moment I walked in, her voice would drop to a conspiratorial whisper, and she'd turn her back to me, quickly ending the call. Just a client with another last-minute change, she'd say, not quite meeting my eyes as she busied herself with the dishwasher. The excuses were always plausible. That was the insidious part. But the thing that really broke through my denial, the detail I couldn't explain away, was the pillow. It sounds ridiculous, I know. Pillow. But for 6 years, I made the bed the exact same way every single morning. It was a ritual, my small piece of order in the chaos of the world. 2 pillows flat, 2 pillows propped up against the headboard, perfectly centered, with the little decorative pillow in the very front. One Tuesday, I came home from work early. As I walked into our bedroom, my eyes snagged on the bed. The pillows were wrong, just tossed on the mattress, a jumbled mess. And one of them, my pillow, had a faint but distinct indentation of a head. An indentation that hadn't been there when I'd left at 7:30 a.m. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I waited until dinner, my food tasting like cardboard. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you take a nap today?" She looked up from her pasta, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Panic? In her eyes before it was gone. "No, why?" "The pillows on the bed were all messed up when I got home." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh my God, Michael. Are you serious? I probably just tidied up and tossed them on there. I don't know. You and your pillows." She shook her head, as if I were the crazy one. I let it go. But a week later it happened again. The same jumbled mess. The same faint indentation. A cold, slithering dread started to coil in my stomach. Someone else was in my house. In my bedroom. In my bed. The thought was so violating it made me feel dizzy. That Friday, I was trying to wrap up a report at my desk, but the words on the screen were just a meaningless jumble. My mind was stuck on the pillows, on the secret phone calls, on the new, expensive perfume she wore. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Linda, a quiet woman from accounting who sat a few cubicles down. We were work-friendly, but not friends. The message was short, but it was a torpedo that blew my carefully constructed reality to pieces. Michael, I am so sorry to do this over text. I debated all day, but I thought you needed to know. I think you should see this. Attached was a photo. It was grainy, clearly taken in a hurry from across the street. But the resolution was good enough. There was no mistaking them. It was Sarah, my wife, her head thrown back in a peal of genuine laughter. A kind of laughter I realized with a sickening jolt that I hadn't heard from her in years. She was walking into the lobby of a discreet hotel on the far side of town. Her hand was held tightly, intimately, in the hand of another man. A man I knew better than anyone. It was my brother, Kevin. Staring at that photo, at their linked hands, something broke inside me. It wasn't just the shock of the betrayal. It was the sickening click of a puzzle piece I didn't even know I was solving falling into place. It had to be him. Of course, it had to be Kevin. This story wasn't new. It was ancient, written into the very foundation of my family. To understand why my wife cheating was one thing, but cheating with him was something else entirely, you have to understand the Evans family ecosystem. We were a solar system with only one sun. And my younger brother, Kevin, was it. My mother, Patricia, was the closest planet, orbiting him with a fierce, blinding devotion. My father, William, was a more distant moon, silently reflecting her light, a passive accomplice in the grand pageant of Kevin's wonderfulness. And I was, I don't know, a stray asteroid, I guess, in the same system but perpetually in the cold outer darkness. It had always been this way. The evidence was a library of 1,000 slights and 1,000,000 paper cuts. I remember my 16th birthday with a clarity that still stings. I'd worked for a full year bagging groceries at the local supermarket, saving every dime for a car. My hands smelled perpetually of raw chicken and floor cleaner, but I was proud. I had a bank account with nearly $2,000 in it. On my birthday, my dad, with a performative flourish, led me outside to the driveway. There sat a 10-year-old Toyota Camry, a faded beige color, with a dent in the passenger door and an engine that sputtered like it had asthma. "She's all yours, son," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We matched what you saved." I was grateful, truly. I had a car. But 3 months later, on Kevin's 16th birthday, Kevin, who had never worked a day in his life, a brand new, cherry red Mustang convertible was parked in that same driveway, a giant, ridiculous bow taped to the hood. I remember standing in the kitchen, watching him preen in the driver's seat. "Why?" I asked my mother, my voice tight. "He didn't do anything to earn it." She turned from the sink, wiping her hands on her apron, and gave me a look of pitying disappointment. "Michael, don't be like that. Your brother has a creative soul. He can't be bogged down with things like part-time jobs. He needs to be inspired. It's different for him." It's different for him. That was the anthem of my childhood. I was the jock. I loved basketball. I lived and breathed it. I made the varsity team as a sophomore. My parents came to maybe 3 of my games in 3 years. There was always a reason. A headache. Prior engagement. But Kevin's dance recitals? Kevin, who had decided one year he was going to be a modern dancer. Those were command performances. I remember one Friday night we had a playoff game, the biggest game of the season. It was the same night as Kevin's spring recital. There was no question which one the family would attend. I sat on the bench before the game, watching the other guy's parents fill the stands, and I felt a familiar, hollow ache in my chest. I scored 20 points that night. We won. I drove home, buzzing with adrenaline, and found the house empty. They were all still at the post-recital reception, celebrating Kevin. He'd been a tree. He stood on stage for 5 minutes with his arms outstretched. A tree. My best friend, David, who I'd met in a freshman engineering class at Mizzou, was my anchor. He was the only one who saw it clearly and wasn't afraid to call it what it was. He'd come over for Thanksgiving and watch in disbelief as my mother would literally cut Kevin's turkey for him, even when he was 19, while simultaneously asking me why I hadn't cleared the table yet. "Dude, it's a cult," he'd tell me later over a beer. "It's the cult of Kevin, and you're the designated scapegoat. I don't know how you've turned out so normal." I hadn't, not really. I was just good at pretending. The only other person who seemed to see through the fog was my Aunt Eleanor, my dad's older sister. She was a tough, no-nonsense widow who'd raised 3 kids of her own. She rarely intervened directly, but she had her ways. She'd be the one to slip me a $50 bill at Christmas, whispering, "Go buy yourself something nice, something just for you." She'd call me after I got my first promotion and tell me she was proud of me, her voice filled with a warmth I never heard from my own parents. She was my proof that I wasn't crazy. So, when Kevin showed up on my perfectly manicured lawn a year before the photo, it was like a fox strolling into a henhouse. I should have locked the door. Instead, I let him in. He was 28 and fresh off a bus from Florida, where he'd been living for the better part of a decade. He spun a sob story about his long-term girlfriend, Megan, a woman I'd only met a handful of times but who seemed perfectly lovely. He claimed she cheated on him with a string of guys and thrown him out with nothing but the clothes on his back. The story had all the hallmarks of a classic Kevin narrative. He was the tragic hero, the victim of a cruel world. My gut told me it was a lie. I tried to find Megan on social media, just to get a sense of her side, but her profiles were locked down tight. I suspected Kevin had already poisoned that well, painting me as his loyal, gullible older brother. He was broke, jobless, and reeked of desperation, and despite every rational thought in my head screaming at me to send him packing, that deep, ingrained programming kicked in. I was the responsible one. I was the fixer. "I'm really in a bind, Mike," he'd said, looking up at me from my comfortable leather couch, his eyes wide and pleading. "I'll do anything. I just need a fresh start." And I gave it to him. I put my own reputation on the line. I went to my boss, Robert Johnson, a stern but fair man who valued integrity above all else. I sat in his imposing office, the smell of wood polish and success in the air, and I sold him a fantasy. "Robert," I'd said, my mouth dry, "I know this is a big ask and I know the policy on hiring family, but my younger brother, Kevin, just moved back to town. He's had a rough go of it, but he's a good kid and a hard worker." Each lie felt like swallowing glass. "I'd like to bring him on in my department. I'll manage him directly. I will personally vouch for his performance and his character. If there is any issue, any at all, it falls on me." Robert had leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes scrutinizing me. "Michael, you're one of my most reliable managers. Your word carries a lot of weight with me. Are you absolutely sure about this? It can get messy." "I'm sure," I'd promised, sealing my own fate. "You won't regret it." He'd finally agreed reluctantly. "All right, but he's on a short leash, and this stays between us." I felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made me sick, closely followed by that old, familiar bitterness. Here I was, a successful man in my mid-30s, still cleaning up my little brother's messes, still desperately trying to prove I was the good son, the responsible one, hoping that this grand gesture would finally earn me a sliver of the approval that was handed to Kevin for simply breathing. Kevin started work the following week, and, predictably, he started spending most of his time at my house. It made sense on the surface. He was living in a cheap, depressing apartment across town. My house was big, comfortable, and Sarah was a great cook. But the dynamic shifted so quickly it was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower blooming. At first, he was just my brother hanging out. Then he became their friend. His conversations with Sarah became longer, more animated. They developed inside jokes that I wasn't part of, their laughter echoing from the kitchen while I sat in the living room, feeling like a guest in my own home. The warnings started as whispers. My loyal assistant, Jessica, a sharp young woman who saw everything, stopped by my desk one afternoon. "Hey, Michael, This is probably way out of line, she began, twisting a pen in her hands. But I saw Sarah and Kevin at that new Italian place downtown yesterday at lunch. I was meeting a client. They looked, I don't know, they looked like they were on a date. I'd thanked her, my heart doing a painful lurch, but I'd rationalized it. A welcome home lunch, nothing more. Then, my sweet, elderly neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, stopped me while I was getting the mail. Your brother sure is a sweetheart, Michael, she'd said, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. I see his car here most afternoons while you're at work. It's so nice that he comes over to help Sarah with things around the house. Each comment was another nail in the coffin of my denial. The excuses I was making for them were wearing thin. I was living in a house full of secrets, and I was the only one who wasn't in on it. And then Linda's text arrived. I stared at that grainy photo, at their intertwined hands, at the pure, unadulterated joy on Sarah's face. A joy I hadn't seen directed at me in years. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a coup. The golden child, my mother's perfect son, had finally staged a successful takeover of the one part of my life I thought was truly mine. And the worst part, the part that made me want to throw my phone through the wall, was the cold, cynical voice in the back of my head whispering, of course he did. He always gets what he wants. And you, as always, are the one left to clean up the mess. For a full minute, maybe two, I just sat there in the sterile quiet of my office. The world beyond my cubicle walls. The gentle click-clack of keyboards, the distant, cheerful ring of a phone, might as well have been on another planet. My world had shrunk to the 4-inch screen in my hand. To that photo, Sarah, Kevin, the hotel entrance, their hands. The first wave was pure, white-hot rage. I had a visceral, physical urge to smash something, to stand up, flip my desk over, and just scream. I imagined driving to that hotel, kicking down whatever door they were behind, and what? The fantasy always dissolved there, into a red mist of incoherent fury. But then, a second wave crashed over me, colder and more terrifying than the first. It was a chilling clarity. Raging wouldn't work. Yelling, screaming, confronting them in a blind fury would only accomplish one thing. It would make me the bad guy. I'd be the unstable, jealous husband. That would be the story they'd tell everyone, and my mother would lead the chorus. I wasn't going to hand them that script. My fingers, shaking slightly, typed a reply to Linda. Thank you for telling me. I appreciate it more than you know. Please, don't mention this to anyone else. Her reply was instantaneous. Of course, my lips are sealed. I'm so sorry, Michael. I knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. I couldn't look either of them in the face and pretend I didn't know. I couldn't sit at my own dinner table and listen to their lies. I packed up my briefcase, told Jessica I was leaving early for a dentist appointment, and walked out of the building like a man in a dream. I drove, not home, but to a park on the other side of town, one where Sarah and I had our third date, feeding stale bread to ducks. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I just sat in my car, staring at the water, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in colors I was too numb to appreciate. I needed a plan, a real one. Confronting them in the house they had defiled, the house I paid the mortgage on, felt wrong. It gave them the home field advantage. I needed neutral ground, a place where I was in control. An idea, cold and calculated and utterly devoid of emotion, began to form. It was a terrible idea, a sick idea. It was perfect. I went home and played the part of the loving husband. I was quiet, but I blamed it on a looming project deadline. The next evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I put my plan into motion. Hey, I said, my voice astonishingly steady. I was just thinking. We haven't had a real weekend away in forever. Just us. What do you say we drive up to the city for a night? I'll get a nice room at the Cheshire. We can have that fancy dinner you've been wanting to try. My treat. Her eyes lit up with a genuine-looking delight. Was it guilt? Was she that good an actress? Or was she just excited at the prospect of a 5-star meal? "Oh, Michael, that sounds absolutely wonderful. Yes, let's do it. It'll be so romantic." The entire next day she was giddy. She bought a new dress. She chattered on about the restaurant, about the hotel. The whole time, I felt like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope, a growing sense of detachment protecting me from the pain. The drive up was tense for me, but she filled the silence with cheerful nonsense. The hotel was as luxurious as she'd hoped. We checked in, and the room was beautiful, overlooking the park. We went to dinner. I ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu. I listened to her talk about her work, about her friends, nodding and smiling like a damn fool. I was an actor playing the role of a man who had no idea his world was about to end. We even went back to the room and were intimate. It was a sick, twisted, out-of-body experience. It was a performance. But I needed her completely and utterly disarmed. I needed her to have no defenses, no excuses prepared. I needed the truth raw and uncut. The next morning, the sun streamed through the massive hotel window. She was sitting up in bed, wrapped in the white hotel robe, sipping a cup of coffee from the room service tray I'd ordered. She looked beautiful, happy, relaxed. She looked like a complete and utter stranger. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my back to her. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The performance was over. "Sarah?" I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the morning air like a shard of glass. "Are you sleeping with my brother?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical presence in the room, sucking out all the air, all the light. I could feel her go rigid behind me. I could hear the tiny clink of her coffee cup as she set it down on the nightstand with a trembling hand. Then came a small, choked sob. The sound I had been waiting for. "Michael!" I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on a crack in the plaster on the opposite wall. "I'm not going to ask you again. Just tell me the truth." The sobs came in earnest then, the messy, heaving kind that are impossible to fake. The dam of her lies had finally broken. It just happened," she wept, the words tumbling out between gasps. "We didn't plan it, I swear. We just have this connection. He understands me in a way you don't. He gets me." "He gets you?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison. The cliché was so insulting it was almost funny. I finally turned to look at her, my face a mask of stone. Her face was blotchy and red, her expensive haircut a mess. She looked small and pathetic. "Let me ask you something else. Have you been sleeping with him in our bed? In my house?" She couldn't answer. She couldn't even look at me. She just bowed her head, her shoulders shaking violently, which was more of an answer than any word could ever be. That was it. That was the period at the end of the sentence. The last tiny, stupid thread of hope that I was wrong, that there was some other explanation, snapped. I stood up from the bed. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just calmly walked over to the chair where my clothes were folded. I picked up my wallet from the nightstand. I picked up my car keys. "What are you doing? Michael, where are you going?" she cried, scrambling out of the bed, tripping on the robe as she grabbed for my arm. I flinched away from her touch like I'd been burned. "I'm going home," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You can stay here. Enjoy the room. I've already paid for it. I'm sure Kevin will be happy to come and pick you up." I walked out of that hotel room and I didn't look back. I left her standing there amidst the wreckage of our marriage, with her new dress and her pathetic tears. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into a new reality. The drive home was a blur of highway and numbness. I was running on pure adrenaline and a grief so profound it felt like a black hole had opened up in my chest. When I walked into my house, it felt utterly alien. Every picture of us on the mantelpiece, every piece of furniture she'd so carefully selected, felt like a prop in a play about a life that had never been real. I went straight to the phone. I had to make one more call. I needed to know the full depth of the betrayal. I dialed my parents' number. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice offensively cheerful. "Michael, what a nice surprise. How was your weekend away?" The question was so jarring, so surreal, it almost made me laugh. "Mom," I said, my voice flat and dead. "I know about Sarah and Kevin." There was a pause. Not a shocked pause. Not a horrified pause. It was a brief, calculating silence. The sound of someone choosing their words carefully. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice instantly shifting into that cloying, sympathetic tone she used when she was about to manipulate someone. "Oh, I am so sorry you had to find out like this." The words like this hit me like a punch to the gut. "You knew?" I asked, my blood running cold. "How long have you known this was happening?" "Well, your father and I noticed they had a special bond, a real connection," she said, her voice smooth as oil. "Kevin has been so lost since he came back, and Sarah, she's just been such a good friend to him, a bright spot in his life. Sometimes, Michael, these things just happen. The heart wants what it wants. The heart wants what it wants." The casual greeting card dismissal of my entire marriage, of my entire life, stole the air from my lungs. "And you didn't think to tell me? Your own son? He's my brother. She's my wife." And then she said the words that would be seared into my brain forever. The words that severed the final tie not just to her, but to my entire concept of family. "Michael, please try to be the bigger person here. Your brother deserves to be happy, too. He's had such a hard life. You're strong. You've always been the strong one. You'll find someone else. We're a family, Michael. The most important thing is that we all get through this together." My throat closed up. I couldn't form a word. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just a betrayal by my wife and brother. It was a conspiracy. My own mother, my own father, who I could now hear murmuring his placid agreement in the background, had watched them methodically dismantle my life and had not only allowed it but had encouraged it. They chose him. They had always chosen him. They would always choose him. "I see," I finally managed to choke out, the two words feeling like a final concession. I hung up the phone. I looked around the perfect house in the quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, and my own family were the perpetrators. I walked upstairs, threw a few days' worth of clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop, and walked out the front door without a second glance. I got in my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, other than away from them. In my rearview mirror, the house with the navy blue shutters shrank until it was just another box on a street full of them. That part of my life was over. It had to be. There was nothing left to salvage. The first few days were a blur. I ended up on David's couch, and he, being the truest friend a man could ever ask for, didn't smother me with questions or offer easy, useless platitudes. He understood the magnitude of what had happened. He just made sure the coffee pot was always full in the morning and handed me a cold beer when he got home from work at night. He let me talk when I needed to, which wasn't often, and sat with me in a comfortable, non-judgmental silence when I couldn't find the words. The TV droned on in the background, a meaningless noise that kept the suffocating silence at bay. "What's the game plan, man?" he finally asked me on the third night. We were sitting on his small apartment balcony. The city lights of St. Charles spread out below us like a blanket of scattered jewels. "There is no game plan," I admitted, the words feeling heavy and true. "Just an exit strategy. I can't stay here, David. In this city, everything here is tainted. Every street corner has a memory, and now they're all poisoned." The phone call with my mother had been the real catalyst. The affair was a fire, but her words were the gasoline she poured on it. It incinerated any lingering sense of obligation, any shred of hope that this could be fixed. It clarified everything with a brutal, stark precision. There was no working through this. There was no family. There was just me and there was them. A line had been drawn in the sand, and I was on one side, and they were all on the other. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but now it was accompanied by a steely resolve. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be a survivor. I took out my laptop and started making calls. My first was to a divorce attorney. I didn't want a mediator. I wanted a warrior. I found a woman named Amanda Wilson online. Her reviews were a mix of glowing praise from former clients and bitter complaints from their ex-spouses. Perfect. I needed a shark. I sat in her sleek, minimalist office an hour later, the polished concrete floors and glass walls feeling as cold and hard as I felt inside. I laid out the whole sordid story, from the favoritism of my childhood to the picture on my phone to the final, damning conversation with my mother. I spoke in a flat, emotionless monotone, like I was recounting the plot of a movie. Amanda listened patiently, her face impassive, occasionally jotting down a note. When I was done, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Michael, I'm sorry you're going through this, but from a legal standpoint, you've given me a lot to work with. Missouri is a no-fault state, which means the adultery itself doesn't guarantee you a lopsided settlement. However, it gives us significant leverage, especially when it comes to temporary orders and public perception, should it come to that. Our primary goal right now is to protect your assets. You said you're the primary earner and the house is titled solely in your name. Yes, I said. I made the down payment from an inheritance from my grandmother years before we were even married. I have the records. Excellent, she said, a grim, determined smile touching her lips. That makes the house a non-marital asset, or at least a significant portion of it is. That's our fortress. First thing tomorrow morning, you will go to your bank. You will withdraw exactly 50% of the liquid funds from any joint accounts. Not a penny more. It's your legal right, and it prevents her from draining them first, which, given the mother's involvement, is a real possibility. Then we file. We file fast and hard. We'll petition for exclusive possession of the marital home, given the circumstances. We strike first. Walking out of her office into the bright sunlight, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in days: power. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was acting. The next steps came quickly, one after the other. I was a project manager, and I treated the dismantling of my life like my final, most important project. I went to the bank and did exactly as Amanda instructed. The teller looked at me with a sympathetic pity as I transferred the 5-figure sum. I called a highly rated realtor, a sharp, energetic woman named Rebecca that Amanda had recommended. I met her at the house, my house, an hour later. David came with me, a silent, supportive presence. I want to sell it, I told her, standing in the foyer that Sarah had so proudly decorated. And I want to do it yesterday. Price it aggressively. I'm not looking to maximize profit. I'm looking to maximize speed. I want it gone. Leave it to me, she said, her eyes already scanning the rooms, making a mental inventory. In this market, a turnkey house like this, priced to move, it'll be gone before you can blink. Then came the conversation I was dreading most. I drove to my office, walked past Kevin's desk without a glance. He wasn't there, thankfully, and went straight to my boss Robert's office. I closed the door behind me. He looked up from his computer, a questioning look on his face. Michael, everything okay? I need to resign, Robert, I said, the words feeling heavy and final in the quiet room. He looked genuinely shocked. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. What? Why? Is this about your brother? Because if he's causing problems, I told you from the start. It's not that, I interrupted, though in a way, it was everything. It's personal. My wife and I are splitting up. I need a clean break, a new start. I can't stay in this city. To his immense credit, he didn't pry for details. He just looked at me with a surprising amount of compassion. Damn, Michael. I'm truly sorry to hear that. You're one of the best managers we've ever had. You've built a hell of a team. The place won't be the same without you. He stood up and extended his hand. If you ever need a professional reference, a personal one, anything at all, you have my number. You call me. You hear. I shook his hand, a lump forming in my throat. Thank you, Robert. That means a lot. His decency was a stark, painful contrast to the casual cruelty of my own family. The final act of severing was digital. I sat on David's couch that night and methodically erased my life. I blocked Sarah's number. I blocked Kevin's. I blocked my parents. I blocked every aunt, uncle, and cousin who had ever sent me a Christmas card. I deactivated my Facebook account, deleted years of photos, and wiped my digital footprint clean. I was building a firewall around my shattered life. The divorce was, as expected, ugly but mercifully quick. Amanda was a tactical genius. Sarah, clearly being coached by my mother, tried to claim half of everything, including the house. But Amanda buried them in paperwork, highlighting the premarital nature of the down payment and filing motions that painted Sarah's behavior in a very unflattering light. Faced with a long, expensive, and potentially embarrassing court battle, she backed down. She walked away with half of our joint savings and her car. I got the house, or rather, the proceeds from its lightning-fast sale. Exactly 2 months after I had walked out of that hotel room, I was standing in a completely empty house, the floors echoing with every footstep, signing the final closing documents with the new owners. It was all gone. My job, my house, my wife, my family. Everything that had defined my life in St. Charles was packed into a handful of boxes in a climate-controlled storage unit. I kept my promise to David and Aunt Eleanor. I gave them a new prepaid cell phone number. Don't give this to anyone, I told them both. Not my parents, not anyone. If you do, I'll have to change it, and then we won't be able to talk. They both understood. The day the sale closed and the money was in my account, I got in my car and started driving north on I-70 with no destination in mind, just a direction. Away. I drove for 2 days, staying in cheap, anonymous motels until I crossed the state line into Minnesota. The air felt different, cleaner, colder. I found a small, furnished apartment in a quiet suburb of Minneapolis, paid the landlord 3 months' rent in cash, and for the first time in my life, I was completely and utterly alone. And anonymous. One of the first things I did was search for a therapist. I found a man named Dr. Hoffman, a kind, gray-haired man with gentle eyes who specialized in trauma and family dynamics. So, what brings you here, Michael? He asked in our first session, his office comfortable and quiet. I took a deep breath. Because, I said, the words feeling more real and true than anything I'd said in years. I need to figure out how to build a life from scratch when I've just learned that the people who were supposed to be my foundation were actually the ones holding the sledgehammer. It was a start. A new city, a new life, a new chance to figure out who Michael Evans was when he wasn't a son, a brother, or a husband. For the first time, maybe ever, I was just me, and it was the most terrifying and liberating feeling in the world. The first year in Minneapolis was the hardest and most important year of my life. Loneliness, I discovered, is a physical entity. It's a cold weight in your chest when you wake up in an unfamiliar apartment where the sun comes through the wrong window. It's the deafening silence of a home with no one to talk to. I got a job, a deliberate step down from my previous role, a lower-stress project management position at a small software startup. I needed a routine, a paycheck, and a reason to get out of bed in the morning. My new boss, Greg, was a laid-back guy in his early 40s who seemed to value competence over office politics, and he didn't ask a lot of questions about my past. For a while, my life was a Spartan triangle. Work, the gym, and my weekly sessions with Dr. Hoffman. Those sessions were my anchor. Dr. Hoffman helped me unpack decades of emotional baggage I didn't even realize I was carrying. That constant, low-level anxiety that had been my lifelong companion, it was the psychic cost of perpetually auditioning for my parents' approval. My deep-seated issues with trust? Not exactly a mystery, given I'd been betrayed by my entire family circle. You're not just recovering from a divorce, Michael, he told me during one particularly difficult session. You're recovering from your childhood. The betrayal was just the final, catastrophic symptom of a disease that's been festering for 35 years. You have to learn to be your own parent now. You have to give yourself the validation you never received from them. It was hard work. It was like learning a new language. He pushed me to stop isolating myself and start living again. Dating was, predictably, a disaster at first. Heeding his advice, I signed up for a dating app. I went on a date with a woman named Melissa who spent 2 solid hours complaining about her ex-boyfriend, dissecting every one of his flaws in excruciating detail. It was like looking into a funhouse mirror of my own bitterness, and I hated what I saw. I realized I wasn't ready. I was still carrying too much anger. I saw potential betrayal around every corner. So, I took a step back from dating and focused on myself. I started exploring my new city not as a resident, but as a tourist. I found hiking trails that snaked along the Mississippi River, the crisp autumn air a welcome shock to my system. I rediscovered my love for reading, spending hours in dusty, independent bookstores, losing myself in other people's stories. I bought a ridiculously expensive coffee machine and learned how to make the perfect latte. Slowly, painstakingly, piece by piece, I started building a life that was mine, filled with things I enjoyed, not things I thought were expected of me. It was about 2 years after I'd moved, on a brisk Saturday morning in the fall, that I met Alex. It was completely by chance, with no expectations. I was at the Mill City Farmers Market, a sprawling, vibrant affair next to the river. I was drawn by the incredible smell of grilling onions and spices to a food stall with a long line. The sign read, "The Brothers Burrito." The man behind the counter was a whirlwind of motion and good humor, taking orders, slinging burritos, and trading jokes with the customers. He had a beaming smile, a dusting of flour on his cheek, and the most alive eyes I'd ever seen. That was Alex. I became a regular. Every Saturday, rain or shine, I'd get my chorizo and egg burrito and we'd chat for a few minutes while he worked. It was easy, effortless. There was no pressure, no agenda. He asked me about my week. I asked him about his. I learned that he was a trained chef and co-owned the stall, and a proper brick-and-mortar restaurant of the same name with his twin brother, Jack. One day, as he handed me my usual, he leaned on the counter. "You know, you've been coming here every week for 3 months, and I just realized I don't even know your name." "It's Michael," I said. "Well, Michael," he said, his smile genuine and warm. "I'm Alex, and I think it's a crime that your only experience of my cooking is in a foil wrapper. You should let me cook you a proper dinner sometime. At the restaurant. On me." The old fear, the familiar flight instinct, flared up. "Don't get close. It's not safe." But looking at his open, honest face, I decided to ignore it. It was just dinner. "I'd like that a lot," I said, surprising myself. Our relationship grew slowly, organically, like a plant turning toward the sun. It was the complete antithesis of my marriage to Sarah. With Alex, there were no games, no hidden meanings, no secrets. We just talked. About everything. He was curious and kind. He wanted to know about my job, my passion for basketball that I'd long since abandoned, my quiet love for old books. A few months in, I knew I had to tell him my story. The whole ugly mess. I was terrified. I was sure that the second he saw the full extent of my damage, he'd run. We were at his apartment, a cozy, lived-in space filled with cookbooks and plants, and I just laid it all out. The golden child brother, the complicit parents, the affair, the divorce, the escape to Minnesota. I told the story without drama, just the flat, hard facts. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He just listened, his expression serious. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. His was warm and steady. "I'm so sorry that happened to you, Michael," he said simply. There was no pity in his voice, only a deep, profound empathy. "That's a heavy burden to carry. But you need to know their toxicity, their choices. That's not your burden anymore. You got out. You escaped. That makes you one of the strongest and bravest people I have ever met." In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. I felt seen. Truly seen for the first time, for exactly who I was, baggage and all. And I was accepted. Meeting his family was another revelation. It was like stepping into a different universe. His parents, Richard and Susan, were warm, boisterous, and loud. They hugged me the first time they met me. His twin brother, Jack, was the quieter, more intense version of Alex, but he welcomed me with a firm handshake and a wry smile. His grandmother, Margaret, was a sharp-witted, 85-year-old matriarch who ruled the family with an iron fist and a tray of the best chocolate chip cookies I'd ever tasted. The first time I had Sunday dinner at their house, surrounded by the chaotic, overlapping, loving energy of the whole family talking and laughing over each other, I had to excuse myself and go to the bathroom because I was on the verge of tears. This, I thought, staring at my reflection in the mirror. This is what a family is supposed to feel like. It wasn't a transaction based on performance. It was just love, unconditional. Alex and I moved in together into a small house with a yard for a rescue dog we named Otis. I left my soulless corporate job and started managing the business side of their growing restaurant empire, which soon expanded to 2, then 3 locations. I was good at it, and for the first time, my work felt meaningful. I was building something with someone I loved. The ghosts of my past were finally fading, becoming faint whispers instead of constant screams. It was about 5 years after my great escape from Missouri that I got the phone call that threatened to shatter the peace. It was Aunt Eleanor. We still talked every few months. She was my one concession, my only link to that old life. I kept it because I knew she was a good person who had always been quietly in my corner. We were catching up, the usual small talk about the weather and her grandkids, when her tone shifted, dropping into the conspiratorial whisper of someone with juicy gossip. "Oh, Michael, you are not going to believe the news I heard through the grapevine." "What's that, Aunt Eleanor?" I asked, settling back on my couch. "It's about your ex-wife, Sarah," she said. "Kevin divorced her." I sat up straight, my heart giving a sudden, hard thump. "Oh, yes," she continued, clearly warming to her topic. "Turns out she was cheating on him. Can you believe the absolute nerve of that woman? With a couple of married men from her work, apparently. Kevin found out, and Lord, he moved fast. Cleaned out their joint bank accounts and had the divorce papers filed before she even knew what was happening. She got next to nothing. Had to move back in with your parents. Can you imagine? The 3 of them all under one roof again. It's all very messy and dramatic." I was silent for a moment, processing the sheer, poetic irony of it all. The cheater got cheated on. The golden child, who had everything handed to him, had finally experienced a betrayal of his own. A younger version of me, the one still raw with pain, would have felt a surge of triumphant, bitter pleasure. But now, I just felt tired, and incredibly, profoundly distant. It was like hearing about the messy season finale of a TV show I'd stopped watching years ago. It had absolutely nothing to do with me anymore. "Wow," I finally said, my voice neutral. "That's really something, isn't it?" she said, misinterpreting my tone as shock. Like I always say, karma's a patient hunter. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room, our dog Otis snoring softly at my feet. Alex was at the restaurant for the dinner rush. I thought about Sarah, trapped in that house with the 2 people who had enabled her betrayal of me. I thought about Kevin getting a taste of his own bitter medicine. There was no joy in it. There was no satisfaction. There was only a profound sense of relief. A deep, soul-level confirmation that I had gotten out. I had escaped the fire, and they were all still trapped inside, burning each other down to keep warm. And for the first time, I didn't feel a single solitary ounce of guilt for being the one who ran to safety. Life with Alex was good. It was more than good. It was real. We built a life that was quiet and strong, anchored in mutual respect and the daily routines of running a business and walking the dog. We were a team. We expanded the restaurant business, opening a beautiful 3rd location in a historic downtown building. We were seriously talking about the future, about surrogacy, about building a family of our own. The life I'd had in Missouri, the man I'd been there, felt like a faded photograph of a distant relative. The peace I had fought so hard for felt permanent. And then, 2 years after Aunt Eleanor's phone call, 7 years after I'd driven north with no destination, the ghosts came knocking. And they didn't knock politely. They tried to kick the door down. It started with an email. The subject line was just my name, Michael. The sender address was one I hadn't seen in 7 years. One I thought I'd forgotten. Patricia Evans. My mother. My hand, holding my morning coffee, froze halfway to my mouth. My first instinct was to delete it without reading, to treat it like the spam it was. But curiosity, that old, treacherous human emotion, got the better of me. I clicked it open. Michael, I know it has been a long time, and I know you don't want to hear from us. I lie awake at night thinking of the mistakes we made. I know we hurt you, but I am your mother, and I miss my son. Your father and I aren't getting any younger. Life is too short for this silence. Please, just let us know you're okay. The cloying sentimentality, the vague, non-apology apology. It was so familiar it made my stomach turn. I deleted it. An hour later, an email from my father. Son, your mother is very upset. We made mistakes. We were wrong. We are so sorry. It's been too long to be so angry. Delete. Then came the social media assault. I had a new, private Facebook profile I'd created mainly to keep in touch with Alex's sprawling family and share pictures of Otis. Suddenly, I had a flood of friend requests. My mother, my father, my cousins, aunts, uncles, even some old high school acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. It was a coordinated attack, an attempt to breach my firewall from all sides. I spent 10 minutes methodically blocking every single one of them. But they were persistent. The next day, an email from a name that made my blood run cold. Kevin Evans. Mike, bro, it's been a long time. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did. I was an idiot. I was a terrible brother, a terrible person. I'm sorry. For everything. I would give anything in the world to just talk to you, to hear your voice. It was a full-on digital siege. For 3 weeks, they bombarded me. I ignored it all. I told myself it didn't matter, that they were just voices from a past I'd already buried. But it was like a leaky faucet in the back of my mind. A constant, irritating drip, 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 drip. What did they want? After 7 years of complete and total silence. Why now? People like them didn't just reach out to apologize. They only reached out when they needed something. Finally, I couldn't take the silent siege anymore. I showed the string of emails to Alex. He read them over, his brow furrowed in concentration. This feels orchestrated, he said, looking up at me. It feels desperate. It's my family, I said with a humorless laugh. Desperate is their default emotional setting. The next email from my mother, the one that arrived the following morning, had the answer. It was blunt, stripped of the sentimental nonsense. It was pure, raw desperation. Michael, I'm going to be direct because we are out of time and out of options. Kevin is sick. He's very, very sick. His kidneys have failed completely. He's on dialysis 3 times a week, but he's not doing well. He's wasting away. The doctors say he needs a transplant, and he needs it soon. I read the words and I felt nothing. No shock, no pity, no satisfaction. Just a cold, hard, clarifying certainty. So that's what this was about. Of course. I read the rest of the email aloud to Alex, my voice flat. We've all been tested. Me, your father, your cousins. None of us are a match. The doctors say a full sibling has the best possible chance. Michael, I am on my knees, begging you. As your mother, please, this is your brother's life. He will die without this kidney. Alex was quiet for a long time, staring at the wall. Wow, he finally breathed. The absolute, astronomical audacity. You're not surprised, are you? I asked, my voice laced with a dark, bitter irony. No, he admitted. But it's still shocking to see it in black and white. After 7 years of nothing, not a birthday card, not a Christmas email, this is how they reach out. Not to truly apologize. Not to make amends, but because they need something from you. An organ. A piece of your body. I wanted to delete the email, throw my laptop against the wall, and forget it ever happened. But I couldn't. It wasn't a leaky faucet anymore. It was a dam that had burst, and I was drowning in the flood of their need. Against my better judgment, I replied. A single sentence. I will get tested here in Minnesota and have my doctor send you the results. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just agreed to the first step. A part of me, a cowardly part, was praying I wouldn't be a match. I was hoping that a quirk of genetics would make the decision for me, that I could just send them a lab report and say, sorry, can't help. A week later, I was sitting in my doctor's office, the crisp paper crinkling under me on the exam table. Dr. Chun, a kind, thorough man, came in with my file. Well, Michael, he said, looking over his glasses at the lab report. From a purely medical standpoint, the results are quite remarkable. You're a perfect match. A 6 out of 6 antigen match. Genetically, you couldn't ask for a better, more compatible donor for your brother. It's the gold standard. Perfect match. Of course, the universe had a truly sick sense of humor. That night, I told Alex. I laid out the whole situation. The perfect match. The family waiting with bated breath for my answer. So what are you going to do? He asked, his voice gentle, careful. I don't know, I said honestly, pacing our living room like a caged animal. The logical part of me wants to just text them no, thank you, and be done with it. But it doesn't feel right. It feels unfinished. I stopped pacing and turned to face him. The words I'd been suppressing for years finally bubbling to the surface. For my entire life, they've written my story for me. I was the responsible son, the boring brother, the jealous husband, the bitter ex. They've never once had to listen to me. They've never had to sit in a room and face the consequences of what they did. Not really. Alex listened, his expression serious and thoughtful. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders, stopping my frantic pacing. His grip was grounding. I will support you no matter what you decide, he said, his eyes locking onto mine, searching my face. 100%. If you want to say no and block them forever, I'm with you. If you decide to do it, I'll be there for you through the whole recovery. But I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you're doing this for you, not for them, not for revenge. I need to know that you're doing this to find your own peace, not to go looking for another war. Because I love the man you are now, Michael. The one who is happy and at peace. And I need to know that after this is all over, you are going to be okay. His words, his love, cut through all the anger and confusion. He was right. This wasn't about Kevin's life or death anymore. This was about mine. It was about closing a door so tightly that no draft from the past could ever seep through again. I need to go there, I said, the decision solidifying in my mind, hard and clear as diamond. I can't do this over the phone. I can't do it in an email. I need to look them in the eyes. I have to deliver this one message in person. So they understand, finally and forever, that it's over. Alex nodded slowly, his eyes still searching mine. He saw the resolve there. Okay, he said softly. Then that's what you'll do. I booked a one-way flight to St. Louis for the following week. I didn't tell my family I was coming. I didn't tell them I was a perfect match. I wanted the element of surprise. This final act, this final scene was going to be written, directed, and produced by me. For the first time ever. The flight to Missouri was a surreal journey into the past. As the plane began its descent, I looked out the window at the familiar green and brown patchwork of the Midwest landscape. A knot of anxiety, cold and hard, tightened in my stomach. I wasn't just flying to a different state. I was flying back into the heart of my own personal history, and I was going there to perform a final, radical surgery. I had told Alex I was doing this for closure, and I meant it. In my therapy sessions with Dr. Hoffman, we'd often talked about the concept of narrative. He told me that for years, my family had controlled my narrative, casting me in a role I never chose. This trip, this final confrontation, was my chance to seize the pen and write my own ending. It wasn't a journey of revenge. It was a pilgrimage to the site of my deepest wounds. I needed to stand in the rubble, not to gloat over the perpetrators, but to declare to myself that I had survived and that I would never, ever be buried there again. I rented a car at the St. Louis airport and drove straight to St. Joseph's Hospital. The sterile, antiseptic smell hit me the second I walked through the automatic doors, and it was so familiar it made my stomach lurch. It was the smell of my childhood, countless visits for Kevin's broken bones from daring stunts, his mysterious stomach ailments that always seemed to flare up around exam time, his allergy tests, all of which warranted far more parental panic and attention than my own mundane injuries. I found his room number at the main nurse's station. As I walked down the polished corridor, the quiet squeak of my shoes against the linoleum was the only sound. As I approached room 412, I could hear my mother's voice, high-pitched and strained with a forced cheerfulness. I paused outside the closed door, leaning my forehead against the cool wood for a second. I took one deep, grounding breath. This is it. The final scene. Your terms. I pushed the door open and walked in. The room fell instantly silent. It was as if someone had hit a mute button. My mother, my father, and my Aunt Eleanor were huddled on one side of the room, a small flock of worried birds. They all turned to look at me, their faces a slow-motion cascade of emotions. First shock, then disbelief, and finally, a dawning, desperate, ravenous hope. My father looked a decade older than the last time I'd seen him. His shoulders slumped, his frame frail and shrunken inside his oversized polo shirt. My mother's face was a roadmap of stress, the lines around her mouth and eyes deeper than I remembered. And there, in the center of it all, in the raised hospital bed, was Kevin, the golden child. He was almost unrecognizable. He was pale and gaunt, his skin having a sickly yellow tinge. His arms were thin, bruised from IVs. He was hooked up to a symphony of machines that beeped and whirred a soft, monotonous rhythm of managed decline. The charming, arrogant glow he'd always carried was gone, replaced by the flat, dull look of a man who was terrified. He stared at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly agape. "Michael," my mother breathed, her voice a reverent whisper. She took a tentative step toward me, as if I were a ghost she was afraid to startle. "You came. I said I'd get tested," I said, my voice even and cold, cutting through the thick, hopeful air. I let my gaze sweep over all of them, lingering for a moment on Aunt Eleanor's worried face, before it landed back on my mother. "I'm a perfect match." The collective sigh of relief in the room was a physical thing. My mother's eyes filled with tears of gratitude, and she clasped her hands together in front of her chest like she was praying to a saint. "Oh, thank God, Michael. Thank you. I knew you would. I knew you wouldn't let your brother?" "I'd like to speak with his doctor," I interrupted, my voice sharp, cutting her off mid-sentence. "With all of you present." A nurse was dispatched, and a few minutes later, a tired-looking man in a white coat with the name tag Martinez entered the room. He looked surprised to see a new face. My parents quickly explained who I was, their voices tripping over each other in their eagerness. Dr. Martinez cleared his throat, looking down at the chart in his hands. "Well, Mr. Evans," he said, addressing me professionally, "as I was just explaining to your parents, Kevin's situation is critical. He's in end-stage renal failure. The dialysis is keeping him alive, but it's a temporary measure, and his body is not responding well. A transplant is his only viable long-term solution. Based on the comprehensive results we received from your physician in Minnesota, you are, from a medical standpoint, an ideal donor. A 6 out of 6 antigen match. It's quite remarkable. Frankly, the sooner we can schedule the surgery, the better his chances for a full recovery." My mother beamed at me, her face shining with triumphant relief. Her plan had worked. The family drama would have a happy ending. Her golden boy was going to be saved. The prodigal son, Michael, had returned to do his duty, and the family would be whole again. The story would be that I had finally forgiven them, that the bonds of family had proven stronger than any silly grudge. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, letting her savor her perceived victory. Then, I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the bed. My footsteps were the only sound in the quiet room. I stood next to my brother, looking down at his pale, frightened face. He looked up at me, a flicker of his old, entitled arrogance warring with a new, raw, primal fear. I reached down and, to the surprise of everyone in the room, I took his hand. It felt cold and clammy, a fragile bird's claw in mine. I leaned in close, so close that only he could hear the softness in my voice. "Did you hear that, Kevin?" I asked, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. "A perfect match, a 1 in a million chance. The doctor said it himself." I could feel a faint, hopeful squeeze from his fingers. I looked into his eyes, letting him see the spark of hope I was offering. "Basically," I continued softly, "I'm the only person in the entire world who can save your life right now." I paused for a beat, letting the words sink in, letting that spark of hope catch fire in his terrified mind. Then, I looked him directly in the eye, and with my next words, I doused that fire with gasoline. "And I'm not going to do it." The gasp from my mother was sharp and ragged, like a tearing cloth. Kevin's eyes widened in sheer horror, and he tried to snatch his hand away, but I held it fast, my grip suddenly like iron. I stood up straight, turning to face the room, my voice no longer a whisper. It was clear, strong, and it echoed with 7 years of suppressed pain and a universe of newfound strength. "For 35 years, I lived in your world," I said, my gaze locking onto my mother's. "A world where my accomplishments were footnotes, and his mistakes were romanticized as the follies of a creative soul. A world where my happiness was always negotiable, and his was paramount. You taught me that. You taught me that my only value was in what I could provide, how I could fix things, how I could make things easier for him." I turned my gaze to my father, who had sunk into a visitor's chair, staring at the floor, the picture of pathetic uselessness. "And you stood by and let her do it. You co-signed every single injustice with your silence. You were a coward then, and you're a coward now." Finally, I looked back down at the man in the bed. "You took my wife. You slept with her in my bed, in the house that I paid for. And you did it all with our parents' blessing, their encouragement. You didn't just break a vow. You conspired with them to shatter my life, and you didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it." "Michael, please," Kevin rasped, tears of terror now streaming down his sallow cheeks. "I'm sorry. Please." "No," I said, my voice like ice. "No more. You don't get to ask me for anything, ever again. You don't get to ask me for a piece of my body to save the life you so carelessly wasted while you were destroying mine." I looked at my mother again, her face a mask of utter rage and disbelief. "You once told me, in this very hospital after I broke my arm, and you were annoyed you had to leave Kevin's rehearsal, that I needed to be a big boy. You told me after the divorce that my brother deserved to be happy. Well, I've learned a new lesson. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to have peace. And my peace requires my complete and total absence from your toxic, miserable lives." I let go of Kevin's hand, dropping it onto the starchy white blanket as if it were something unclean. "I didn't come here to save him," I said, my voice ringing with a final, absolute finality. "I came here to tell you this to your faces. I came here so there would be no misinterpretations, no room for your revisionist history. I am choosing me. I am choosing my life. I am choosing the family that chose me back." I glanced at Dr. Martinez, who was standing frozen by the door, his professionalism warring with his shock. "His condition is a direct result of his own choices. This is my choice." My mother finally found her voice. It wasn't a word. It was a raw animal shriek of pure fury. "How could you? How can you be so cruel? He's your brother. You're killing your own brother." I looked at her one last time, my heart a cold, hard, peaceful stone in my chest. "No," I said calmly, the truth of the words settling over me like a warm blanket. "You've all been killing me my whole life. I'm just refusing to die. And with that, I turned my back on all of them. On the incessant beeping of the machines, on my mother's hysterical screams, on my father's silent, pathetic shame, and on my brother's terrified, gulping sobs. I walked out of that room, out of that hospital, and out of their lives forever. The heavy door swung shut behind me, and for the first time in 42 years, I felt truly, completely free. I didn't run. I didn't even walk fast. I walked through the rest of the hospital corridor with a steady, unhurried pace, my footsteps echoing softly on the polished linoleum. I was aware of nurses and visitors turning to stare, their curiosity piqued by the raw, animal sounds of my mother's screams still faintly audible behind the closed door of room 412. I didn't meet their eyes. I just kept walking. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I were physically shedding a weight I'd been carrying for decades. It wasn't the triumphant march of a victor who has vanquished his enemies. It was the quiet, peaceful walk of a man who had just set down a 100-pound rucksack after a 40-year hike. I got in my rental car, the anonymous vehicle a perfect symbol of my new, untethered self. I drove to the airport, returned the car, and went through security in a calm, detached daze. I didn't turn my phone back on. I didn't want to see the inevitable flood of vitriol, the desperate pleas, the accusations. Their opinions no longer had any power over me. They were just noise from a distant storm. I got on the first available flight back to Minneapolis, and as the plane climbed through the clouds, leaving the state of Missouri behind, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. When the plane was finally touching down in my new home state, I turned my phone on. I had one new text message. It was from Alex. It just said, "I love you. Come home." I walked through the door of our house an hour later. The lights were low, and the house was quiet. Alex was there, waiting in the entryway. He didn't say, "How did it go?" or "What happened?" He just opened his arms, and I walked into them, burying my face in the familiar comfort of his shoulder. He held me for a long time, his hand stroking the back of my head. The scent of our home, a mix of the spices from the restaurant that always clung to his clothes and the clean, simple smell of our life together, filled my lungs, and it was the smell of sanctuary. "It's over," I whispered into his shirt. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Now let's get you to bed. You must be exhausted." That night, as I lay in our bed, listening to the gentle rhythm of Alex's breathing beside me and the soft snores of Otis, the dog from his bed in the corner, I felt a sense of quiet I hadn't realized was possible. The constant, low-grade static of resentment and injustice that had been the background soundtrack to my entire life was gone. There was only silence, a peaceful, healing, and utterly complete silence. I never found out what happened to Kevin. I never asked Aunt Eleanor, and she, in her quiet wisdom, must have understood that a final line had been crossed, because she never offered the information. Whether he found another donor on the National Registry, whether one of my cousins was a half-match and donated, whether he lived or died, I honestly don't know. And I realized with a startling clarity that I didn't care. Not out of malice, not out of a desire for his suffering, but out of a profound and total indifference. His fate was his own, no longer tangled up with mine. My victory wasn't in his potential demise. My victory was in my own hard-won peace. It was in the easy laughter that now filled my house. It was in the loud, chaotic, loving Sunday dinners with Alex's family. It was in waking up every single morning knowing that I was valued not for what I could give or what I could fix, but simply for who I was. A few months ago, Alex and I were at the lake house we'd bought a couple of years back. We were watching our two sons, 6-year-old Noah and 2-year-old Ethan, throwing stones into the water. They were ours, brought into this world through the miracle of surrogacy and the love Alex and I had for each other. They were the embodiment of all the hope and happiness we had built together, from the ashes of my former life. Noah, his face a perfect blend of me and the man I loved, ran up to me, his face bright with pure, unadulterated excitement. "Look, Daddy, I made it skip 5 times, he yelled, his voice full of pride. I smiled, a real, bone-deep smile that reached my eyes. I looked at him, at his little brother toddling after him, at Alex who was walking toward me with that same easy, open-hearted grin he'd had at the farmer's market all those years ago. This was my family. This was my life. Not the one I was born into, but the one I had fought for. The one I had built. The one I had chosen. And it was more than perfect. It was real. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reached you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make an impossible choice to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.